The world settles into silence as night drapes itself across the sky, and in that stillness, history begins to stir. It whispers from the edges of forgotten maps and crumbling stones, inviting us to walk through corridors where time once lived vividly. Most people sleep unaware that beneath their quiet towns and familiar landscapes lie stories deliberately buried, tales of empires that did not simply collapse, but were carefully erased. If you listen closely, you can almost hear their fading voices, echoing through sand, soil, and shattered memory, urging us to look closer. What if entire civilizations vanished for reasons no historian can fully explain, leaving only questions
The
waiting in the
dating was
dark?
clearly
And still,
misaligned.
the silence
The
hides far
timeline was
deeper
accurate.
secrets. History
History
is often
itself
presented as a
was flawed.
clean, linear progression, yet when you peel back its polished surface, strange inconsistencies begin to emerge. Scattered across deserts, jungles, and ocean floors are traces of civilizations so faint and contradictory that they feel less like chapters of human progress and more like carefully smudged notes. Some ruins hint at a level of knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet, as if their builders were borrowing ideas from a future no one can account for. Other clues appear intentionally obscured, erased by time or perhaps by human hands that feared what these remnants represented. Archaeologists debate their origins, but the pieces never quite fit, leaving gaps where a story should be. It is almost as if these cultures were meant to be forgotten, buried under layers of soil and silence until their existence slipped from collective memory. And yet the fragments persist, defying explanations, inviting questions that modern history can't comfortably answer. Why do some ruins hint at knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet? And what does it mean that they continue to whisper from the shadows despite every effort to hide them? The deeper we venture into humanity's earliest stories, the more fragile the line between fact and myth becomes. Archaeology offers fragments, broken pottery, half eroded walls, scattered bones, while legend provides sweeping tales of golden cities, impossible journeys, and kings who commanded the elements. Most scholars treat these stories as symbolic, comforting narratives shaped by imagination rather than memory. Yet sometimes a ruin emerges that mirrors a myth too closely, or an artifact turns up in a place no logical trade route could explain, and the certainty begins to waver. These mismatches whisper of forgotten worlds, hinting that ancient storytellers might have been passing down distorted truths instead of pure invention. Across continents, cultures separated by oceans speak of sunken lands, sky-born teachers in cities swallowed by forests, long before written history began. It raises an unsettling possibility, one that lingers in the quiet gaps between discovery and interpretation. What if the legends are the only surviving memories of entire lost realms, preserved in poems and fireside stories because their physical traces were washed away, buried, or erased? And if that is true, how much of our past have we mistaken for fantasy simply because the evidence still sleeps beneath the earth? The desert has always been a place of silence, but beneath its golden waves lie echoes of kingdoms that once pulsed with life. Long before the Sahara became an ocean of sand, great settlements thrived at the edges of forgotten rivers and vanished lakes. Climate shifts came slowly at first, then with devastating force, pushing entire cultures towards collapse as dunes advanced like a living tide. Today, only fragments remain, crumbled walls, half-buried pillars, and mysterious stone foundations peeking through the surface after storms. These ruins feel like the breath of a world erased, a reminder that time does not always destroy gently. Archaeologists map what little emerges, but for every site uncovered, countless more sleep beneath layers untouched for millennia. What lies beneath dunes no one has excavated yet, and what stories might they tell if the sands finally release their grip? Scattered across remote Saharan outcrops are inscriptions that defy every attempt at translation. They're carved into smooth stone faces, symbols that resemble no known alphabet, patterns too deliberate to be random, yet too alien to connect with any surviving linguistic family. Travelers who encounter them describe a strange sense of familiarity, as if the symbols are meant to be understood but remain locked behind a barrier of time. Some researchers believe they belong to pastoral cultures predating Egypt itself, while others suspect they may represent a vanished people with no recognized descendants. Attempts to compare them with Berber, Nubian, Phoenician, or Proto Saharan scripts lead only to dead ends. Each carved line seems to whisper of a story we're not yet equipped to read. And perhaps these markers are not messages meant for us at all, but remnants of a civilization wiped from memory so thoroughly that even their language has no surviving echo. Could these be the only surviving voices of a civilization wiped from memory, preserved in stone long after the people who wrote them were consumed by shifting sands? Across the desert, archaeologists keep finding objects that should never have been there: glass beads from the Mediterranean, metal goods resembling West African craftsmanship, and shells from distant coastlines carried deep into inland wastelands. Each discovery disrupts the accepted timeline of trans Saharan exchange, hinting at a trade network far older and more complex than history accounts for. These artifacts suggest that long before camel caravans crossed the dunes, long before recorded routes connected empires, isolated cultures were exchanging goods across impossible distances. Yet the mechanism remains mysterious. No roads, no settlements large enough and to support massive trade journeys, no inscriptions describing these exchanges, only scattered evidence left behind like breadcrumbs across an empty landscape. Some historians theorize that early kingdoms may have mastered desert navigation long before later civilizations understood its dangers, while others suspect there were once green corridors, now erased by climate. But none of the theories fully explain how these objects travel so far. How did isolated desert cultures acquire artifacts from thousands of miles away? And what forgotten pathways once stitched these silent kingdoms together before they vanished beneath the sands? Along the vast rim of the Indian Ocean lie the ghostly remains of cities that once thrived with merchants, sailors, and storytellers, places where ships from distant horizons anchored beside bustling markets. Today, many of these harbors rest quietly beneath the waves, their streets preserved in eerie stillness on the ocean floor. Off the coasts of India and Sri Lanka, entire neighborhoods sit submerged, complete with stone wharves and foundations that hint at sophisticated maritime engineering. Madagascar and East Africa tell similar tales, their underwater ruins revealing a network of trade far more expansive than history admits. What unsettles researchers most is not the existence of these sunken settlements, but the timeline. Many of these cities appear to have drowned within the same narrow window of centuries, as if something swept across the region with relentless precision. Some blame earthquakes, others rising seas. But the uniformity of the collapse raises questions that science struggles to answer. Why did so many thriving settlements sink within the same few centuries? And what force could have reshaped entire coastlines with such deliberate silence? Among ancient nautical charts, there are a few that defy explanation. Maps drawn with coastlines rendered far too accurately for their time. Medieval Arab cartographers sketched southern seas with uncanny precision, while even older documents hint at knowledge that should only have been possible with advanced navigation tools. These maps depict islands that were supposedly unknown, shorelines shaped as if viewed from above, and ocean currents charted with a level of detail modern experts struggle to believe. Some scholars argue these cartographers relied on information passed down from mariners we no longer remember, while others suspect the charts may be copies of even older documents now lost to history. The origins of this knowledge remain a puzzle. Who mapped lands that supposedly hadn't been discovered yet? And if such maps existed, what happened to the civilization capable of producing them? Their silence feels almost intentional, as though their mastery of the sea was a secret they carried with them into the depths. Across islands scattered from East Africa to Southeast Asia, oral traditions tell eerily similar stories. They speak of ancestors who came from a distant maritime kingdom, guided by star paths and ocean rhythms known only to their navigators. These legends describe a great migration led not by chance, but by intention, carried out by a people whose ships were said to move like shadows across the waves. Yet no empire in recorded history fits the description. Genetic links between far flung island cultures suggest an ancient connection, but the identity of the empire behind it remains elusive. Some myths describe cataclysms that drove these seafarers from their homeland. Others hint at a deliberate dispersal, as if they were mapping the world long before later civilizations dared venture far from shore. What if these stories are the last surviving GPS of the ancient world, fragments of a maritime power erased from history except for the memories carried in songs and tales? And if such an empire once dominated the Indian Ocean, what destiny befell it that left only whispers in its wake? Long before the pharaohs carved their names into stone and crowned themselves as living gods, another people walked the valleys of the Nile, leaving behind structures that defy both logic and chronology. Scattered across the white desert are fragments of monuments whose weathering suggests an age far older than the earliest dynasties. Some walls are cut with a precision that seems out of place beside the rougher methods of Egypt's formative years, as if the knowledge belonged to a vanished lineage of engineers. Their blocks fit together with such seamless unity that they resemble later architectural achievements by millennia. Archaeologists debate how such mastery appeared so early and why it seems to fade before Egypt's classical period truly begins. These ruins raise questions that textbooks politely sidestep. Why did builders use techniques supposedly invented millennia later? And what level of sophistication must an unknown civilization have possessed to carve such timeless signatures into the desert? The silence of these structures is almost deliberate, as though their creators intended their work to outlast memory itself. In the depths of desert caves and ancient burial grounds, skeletal remains have been unearthed that do not align with the known populations of early Egypt. Their skull shapes, burial customs, and accompanying artifacts hint at a people who lived alongside proto-dynastic groups, yet seem to follow entirely different cultural patterns. Some skeletons show signs of a ritual tradition absent from early Nile societies, while pottery fragments display artistic flourishes unrelated to neighboring cultures. Genetic testing offers partial clues, but no clear identity. leaving these individuals suspended between history and mystery. Were they migrants from distant lands, or the last remnants of an older civilization swallowed by time? Their presence challenges the clean narrative of Egypt's formation, suggesting that the cradle of the Nile was shared by multiple cultural branches, one of which has no recognized descendants. Did an unidentified civilization jumpstart Nile culture, influencing early builders before vanishing so completely that their name was never recorded? If so, their fingerprints remain etched into the foundation of Egypt's rise, invisible but undeniable. Deep within abandoned quarries, strange tool marks decorate the exposed rock faces, marks unlike those left by later Egyptian craftsmen. Some cuts arc with a precision suggesting specialized instruments. Others resemble experimental techniques no known culture used at the time. The craftsmanship hints at a school of stone carvers whose skills rose suddenly, shone brilliantly, and then extinguished without trace. The Egyptians who followed them built monuments of grandeur, yet none replicated these exact patterns or techniques, as though the knowledge had belonged to outsiders or an earlier lineage entirely. The absence of transitional styles only deepens the mystery. No evolutionary development, no gradual refinement, just a burst of mastery and then silence. Archaeologists search for workshops, tools, or inscriptions that might explain the artisan's origins, but nothing emerges except questions carved into stone. Where did these craftsmen come from, and where did they disappear to? Their legacy remains scattered across the desert, ghost signatures of a lost tradition that shaped the earliest monuments before slipping away like footsteps erased by shifting sands. High in the Andean mountains, where the air thins and clouds drift like wandering spirits, lie the remnants of cities far older than the Inca Empire. These structures cling to cliffs so steep it seems impossible that ancient hands carried stones there, let alone built entire settlements. Terraces wrap around mountainsides like ribbons, and narrow stairways disappear into mists that veil their full extent. The altitude alone would challenge even modern climbers, yet these forgotten builders mastered landscapes that most civilizations would have feared. Their cities overlook valleys carved by glaciers and rivers, as if positioned with intention, strategic, spiritual, or both. Archaeologists puzzle over how such remote sites were supplied, defended, or even reached without advanced tools. No clear answer emerges, only the unsettling realization that these settlements represent a sophistication far ahead of their time, who built cities in places humans shouldn't be able to reach, and what drove them to choose heights where the sky presses so closely against stone. The silence of the mountains offers no explanation, only the echo of a vanished empire whose footsteps linger in the clouds. Scattered across these highland ruins are stone blocks so enormous and intricately shaped that they seem almost unnatural. Some weigh dozens of tons, yet they interlock with a precision that eludes even modern craftsmen. The seams between blocks are so tight that not even a blade of grass can slip through, suggesting a technique that borders on surgical rather than architectural. The surfaces show no chisel marks, consistent with known Andean tools, and the angles, perfectly carved into intricate polygons, fit together like pieces of an ancient three-dimensional puzzle. Although the Inca are often credited with this style, many of these stones predate their rise, leaving archaeologists to question where the knowledge began. Some propose lost methods of softening rock. Others point to sophisticated engineering principles learned from an unknown predecessor, but none of these theories fully explain how a so called primitive civilization achieved feats that modern builders can't replicate without machinery. How did a primitive civilization achieve engineering modern builders can't replicate? And why does their expertise appear suddenly as if borrowed from another world? These stones stand like riddles carved into the mountains, defiant and enduring despite every attempt to decipher their origin. Amid these enigmatic ruins, researchers have discovered alignments so precise they transform empty plazas and stone towers into celestial instruments. At dawn and dusk, shadows fall across carved markers with deliberate accuracy, tracing solstices and equinoxes with remarkable understanding. Some sites form sight lines that track lunar cycles, stellar risings, and planetary movements invisible to the untrained eye. What surprises scholars most is that several alignments correspond to constellations visible only from regions far beyond the Andes, suggesting either ancient travel, shared knowledge across continents, or a sky once perceived differently. These mountain astronomers seem to have woven mythology, agriculture, and cosmic observation into a single worldview, embedding it into their architecture so that the stones themselves recorded the heavens. Their maps hint at a science deeper than survival, a search for meaning written across the sky. Why did their star maps include constellations only visible from other hemispheres? And what journeys, literal or symbolic, might these clues represent? The highlands guard their secrets closely, holding on to a cosmic wisdom that flickers like a forgotten constellation waiting to be rediscovered. Scattered across the Silk Road's most unforgiving stretches are the remains of fortresses whose origins sit outside every known chronicle. Their walls rise from barren sands, like the rib cages of long dead beasts, weathered but stubbornly intact. Built from stone and mud brick, these strongholds occupy strategic vantage points, oases, cliff edges, and narrow passes, but no empire claims them. Chinese records remain silent, Persian scripts make no mention, and Central Asian chronicles pass over them as if they never existed. Travelers in the region speak of ghost cities, abandoned outposts where wind whistles through empty corridors that once guarded caravans laden with silk, spices, and secrets. The architecture hints at a disciplined, organized people, but their identity dissolves into speculation with every excavation. Why do these fortresses appear in no empire's records? And what force or fear drove their builders to leave behind only stone shells in the heart of the desert? Their anonymity suggests a power that operated in shadows, thriving where the major empires looked away. Deep in the Taklamakan Desert, one of the world's most lethal sand seas, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of scrolls and wooden tablets preserved by the brutal dryness. The writing on them flows in looping, intricate symbols, unlike any known script of the ancient Silk Road. Some characters resemble early Indo-European alphabets. Others echo Chinese strokes, yet none align with the linguistic families scholars use to trace cultural origins. Attempts to decipher the texts falter because the vocabulary offers no recognizable patterns, no repeated markers for numbers, names, or common objects. Instead, the script reads like a code written for minds that no longer exist. Some researchers speculate that these documents belong to a vanished merchant guild, their trade secrets encoded to protect precious knowledge. Others believe the script may represent a culture with no surviving descendants, a people erased entirely by conquest, climate, or the desert's relentless advance. Yet the materials suggest the writers valued record keeping, meaning important information lies locked in these undeciphered lines. What knowledge is locked inside a language no one alive can read, and what revelations about the Silk Road's hidden history sleep within the silence of those fragile wooden slips? Among the archives of China, Persia, and India are scattered references to a powerful trading confederation that once controlled vast stretches of the Silk Road. Described as wealthy, elusive, and fiercely independent, this shadow empire appears repeatedly in foreign annals, yet never identifies itself through monuments, coins, or inscriptions. Archaeologists search for their settlements, their burial grounds, even a single artifact unquestionably tied to their name. But the desert yields nothing. No known tombs, no royal remains, not even mass graves of laborers. It is as if the people dissolved into the dunes the moment their era ended. Some historians propose that they traveled constantly, living and dying on the move. Others believe their funerary customs left no trace, but the absence of bones, bodies, or any physical legacy raises unsettling questions. How can an entire empire leave not a single verified burial? And what does such emptiness reveal about a civilization that chose to exist in motion and memory instead of stone? The Silk Road remembers them only in whispers, a ghost empire that shaped history without ever revealing its face. As the Arctic warms and ancient permafrost reluctantly melts, fragments of a forgotten past rise from the frost-bitten, ground-like messages preserved in nature's own vault. Stone foundations emerge where no settlement should have stood, and remnants of wooden structures, astonishingly intact, appear in regions once believed uninhabitable. Tools, hearths, and fragments of woven material reveal that entire communities once flourished here, surviving conditions modern expeditions struggle with. These ruins challenge the assumption that the far north was always empty, occupied only by nomadic hunters. Instead, the evidence points to stable settlements engineered with astonishing resilience against cold and isolation. Some foundations suggest multi-room dwellings, while others appear to be communal halls built for gatherings, rituals, or governance. Archaeologists debate whether these were outposts of known Arctic cultures or something entirely separate, something older. Yet the deeper question lingers like a cold breath in the wind. How did ancient people survive in conditions modern expeditions struggle with? And what knowledge did they possess that allowed them not merely to endure the Arctic's brutality, but to build within it? Amid these frozen ruins, researchers have unearthed metal artifacts that defy expectations, tools and ornaments forged from alloys believed to be unknown to ancient northern cultures. The metalwork displays techniques requiring sustained high heat, precise control, and an understanding of metallurgy far beyond what isolated Arctic societies were thought capable of. Some objects contain traces of elements rarely found together in nature, suggesting deliberate smelting rather than accidental formation. Others show advanced casting methods with lines so smooth they resemble modern fabrication more than ancient craft. The presence of such artifacts raises unsettling possibilities. Did these northern communities develop a metallurgical tradition entirely on their own, or did they inherit knowledge from an earlier, unrecorded civilization? And if they learned it from others, who were the teachers, travelers from distant lands, or remnants of a forgotten people who called the ice their home long before recorded history? Who taught metallurgy to a civilization isolated by glaciers, and why did their techniques vanish so completely that not even legends preserve their skill? Among Arctic tribes, there are stories softly told, rarely written, that speak of an ancient ruling class who walked the frozen lands long before the current peoples settled there. These tales describe figures taller than ordinary men, clothed in thick furs and carrying tools that glinted like captured sunlight. They were said to build shelters that could withstand storms and to navigate the great ice fields as easily as others follow forest paths. Some legends claim they could read the sky and predict the weather with uncanny accuracy, guiding entire clans through treacherous seasons. Though modern historians dismiss these accounts as myth, the consistency of the narratives across distant cultures is striking. Each describes a powerful but ultimately doomed people who vanished suddenly, leaving only faint memories behind. As new archaeological discoveries surface, these whispered tales feel less like folklore and more like distant recollections of a forgotten northern empire. Are these stories distant memories of a forgotten northern empire, preserved through generations of oral tradition, even as the physical traces of the rulers slipped beneath ice and silence? The answers may still lie frozen, waiting for the world to warm just enough to reveal them. For centuries, dense jungles concealed some of humanity's most impressive achievements, swallowing stone walls and entire city grids beneath tangled vines and towering trees. Only in recent decades, with the help of LiDAR scanning from aircraft, have researchers begun to uncover the truth. Vast civilizations once flourished in regions long assumed to be uninhabited. In Southeast Asia, LiDAR reveals sprawling temple complexes, reservoirs, and road networks stretching far beyond the visible ruins. The Amazon, too, hides geometric geoglyphs, settlement clusters, and defensive works that hint at large populations organized around sophisticated agriculture. These discoveries suggest urban planning on a scale no one expected, with cities interconnected by channels and elevated walkways lost beneath centuries of growth. Every new scan redraws our understanding of the ancient world, challenging assumptions about where advanced societies could thrive. How many cities are still hidden beneath the leaves, waiting for technology to peel back the canopy and expose the forgotten kingdoms carved into the jungle's heart? Across these jungles lie enormous terraces that climb hillsides in sweeping layers, their edges so sharply defined they still hold shape despite centuries of erosion. Unlike agricultural terraces designed for crops, many of these structures lack signs of irrigation or soil enrichment. Instead, they appear ceremonial, symbolic, or entirely utilitarian in ways we can no longer decipher. Some span vast areas, forming geometric patterns visible only from above, while others ascend mountain slopes in ways that seem designed to impress the sky more than any human observer below. Their scale suggests collective labor and centralized authority, yet their purpose remains speculative. Were they platforms for ritual gatherings, defensive installations, or astronomical markers? Archaeologists sift through clues, but definitive answers evade them. Why build enormous structures if no one was meant to see them, especially in landscapes where the canopy would have obscured most of their grandeur? These terraces linger like unanswered questions, architectural echoes of societies whose motivations are lost to time. Hidden beneath the jungle floor are ancient roads, straight raised causeways that cut through forests with engineering precision. Some extend for miles before abruptly disappearing into unbroken wilderness, terminating without settlements, temples, or identifiable destinations. Built from compacted earth, stone, and in some cases elevated platforms, these roads suggest intentional design and significant resources, yet their endpoints remain a mystery. In Southeast Asia, Some causeways align perfectly with celestial events, hinting that they may have served ritual purposes rather than practical ones. In the Amazon, certain roads lead directly toward areas where LIDAR later revealed settlement traces, not enough to form full cities, but enough to suggest a broader network now erased. It is tempting to imagine that these roads once connected a vast system of towns, markets, and ceremonial centers, wiped clean by time, disease, or environmental collapse. Did the rest of the network belong to an empire now entirely erased, its highways surviving only as ghost paths beneath the soil? Each rediscovered causeway adds another piece to a puzzle whose edges keep expanding. Across continents and ages, the downfall of forgotten civilizations often coincides with sudden shifts in the natural world, events so abrupt and violent that they reshaped entire landscapes. Archaeological layers reveal periods where once fertile valleys dried into cracked plains, where reliable monsoons failed for decades, and where gentle rivers swelled into catastrophic floods that swallowed entire settlements. These changes came with little warning, leaving ancient societies scrambling to adapt as their food sources vanished and their environments turned hostile. Some cultures migrated in desperation, others fortified their cities only to watch nature reclaim them, yet many of these disasters never made it into surviving records, erased either by the devastation itself or by the collapse that followed. How many disasters are missing from the written record, hidden beneath silt and sand, leaving only indirect clues that hint at catastrophes powerful enough to topple kingdoms? The silence of these vanished empires may be the loudest evidence of all. History remembers migrations as slow, wandering movements, but evidence from forgotten kingdoms suggests waves of displacement that were anything but gentle. When climate shifts, warfare, or scarcity struck, entire populations uprooted at once, creating human storms that swept across regions with overwhelming force. These migrations collided with smaller or weakened civilizations, absorbing them, overwhelming them, or scattering them so thoroughly that their identities dissolved within generations. Archaeological digs reveal sudden changes in pottery styles, burial customs, and language fragments, signs that once distinct cultures were consumed by incoming groups. Yet the conquerors rarely left stable legacies. Many themselves vanished later, overtaken by newer migrations or undone by the same pressures that displaced those before them. What if the conquerors themselves vanished without trace later, leaving behind only the cultural debris of societies they once absorbed? These storms of movement reshaped ancient landscapes, erasing borders and identities with a force more relentless than war. And in the aftermath, history struggled to remember who had been lost first. Not all collapses were caused by nature or migration. Some were engineered through the suppression of ideas. Throughout history, powerful groups have destroyed knowledge that threatened their authority. Rituals deemed dangerous, technologies considered taboo, or scientific insights that challenged prevailing worldviews. In the ruins of forgotten civilizations, there are hints of sudden intellectual breaks. Abandoned workshops where tools were left mid-carving, libraries reduced to ash, and temples sealed as though their rituals had become intolerable. Some technologies disappear without gradual decline, suggesting deliberate eradication rather than natural loss. Oral traditions across the globe speak of knowledge once held by common people, later hoarded or outlawed when new leaders rose to power. Even today, traces of unexplained craftsmanship or celestial understanding point to expertise that seems out of place for its era. Who benefits when history is erased? And what truths were so dangerous that entire civilizations or their conquerors chose to bury them? The absence of knowledge becomes a clue in itself, a missing chapter that hints at conflicts fought not with weapons, but with memory. In the silence left behind, we glimpse the shadows of ideas powerful enough to reshape the world and terrifying enough to destroy. Every year, the past becomes a little less silent. New tools, once unimaginable, are lifting the veil that time draped over forgotten civilizations. LiDAR pulses through thick jungle canopies, revealing city grids and monumental structures where explorers once saw only wilderness. Genetic analysis traces ancient migrations with a precision that transforms myths into plausible histories, mapping the footsteps of peoples whose names have long vanished. Satellite archaeology exposes patterns invisible from the ground: buried walls, lost canals, and roads that connect ruins separated by thousands of miles. Together, these technologies allow us to reconstruct worlds wiped clean by catastrophe or conquest, breathing life into stories that lay dormant for centuries. Yet each discovery uncovers new mysteries, new gaps, new questions begging to be followed deeper into the unknown. What hidden worlds will tomorrow's discoveries uncover, and how many civilizations still wait beneath soil, ice, and ocean for the moment our tools finally become sharp enough to hear their whispers again? Even when empires fall, they do not disappear. Their echoes linger in the languages spoken in remote valleys, in rituals practiced without memory of their origins, and in the stones repurposed into newer walls. Symbols carved into forgotten temples find unexpected twins in distant cultures, hinting at ancient connections long assumed impossible. A melody passed down through generations may carry fragments of a hymn once sung in a long-lost capital. The lines between past and present blur when we recognize how deeply forgotten civilizations have shaped the world we inhabit. Their ideas ripple through time, transformed yet intact, reminding us that memory does not rely solely on written records. What traditions might be the fragile descendants of empires we've never heard of, preserved unconsciously in the rhythms of daily life? Every gesture, every story, every custom may hold a clue, small, quiet, but persistent, offering proof that the past continues to speak even when we've forgotten how to listen. As we close this journey through vanished kingdoms, it becomes impossible not to wonder how the future will remember us. Civilizations that once seemed eternal now survive only as shards and shadows, their greatest achievements reduced to puzzles for modern minds. Yet they, too, must have believed their cities would stand forever. Their markets thrived, their scholars taught, their monuments dominated the horizon until time, nature, or human ambition swept them aside. One day our world may be viewed the same way: a layer of sediment, a scatter of ruins, a collection of artifacts awaiting interpretation. Future archaeologists might walk through the remains of our cities, puzzling over technologies they barely recognize, speculating about the beliefs that shaped our lives. What will they say about the empire we're building now, and what clues will survive to tell our story when memory has faded? The quiet hours of night, when the world grows still, the past reminds us that every civilization speaks, rises, falls, and whispers its final message to the ages. And perhaps the only true immortality lies in listening deeply, humbly, endlessly to the worlds that came before us,